The town of Grand Rapids kept its ghosts neatly boxed and labeled. Decades after the laughter stopped, after the lights were shuttered and the pizza ovens cold, the faded signs and boarded windows still spoke in the same tone as a closed mouth. They once belonged to kids. Parents told themselves the reasons the restaurants closed were bureaucratic. Financial, a product of trend and time. A few older people said quieter things, that something terrible had happened there. Children who had been dragged home from those arcade rooms never came back. Names were said quickly and then changed, as if the syllables stuck in the throat. Mike Schmidt grew up with one of those names stuck in his throat. Garrett. He had been taken when Mike was very young, a sticky-handed memory of a purple car and a man who never stopped meaning anything but loss. By 2004, that memory worked on Mike like rust, slow and relentless, eating through what steadiness he'd tried to build. Jobs came and went. Anger came and came again, misdirected and then regretted. He lived with his 11-year-old sister, Abby, in a cramped rental house that smelled of old tea and younger dreams. Abby still wanted a birthday party. Mike still wanted to make sure the world didn't ask them to sleep on the street. When desperation becomes decision, small towns turn to familiar ruins. Old businesses, abandoned arcades, shuttered diners, places other people avoid are suddenly resource-rich to someone with nothing to lose. Steve Raglan promised steady pay, a week-long stretch of nights, and a fat weekend bonus that would solve rent and breathe life into the idea of a summer birthday party. The job was at a pizzeria Mike had seen only in grainy photographs. Freddy Fazbear's pizza place, a place most of the town protected itself from remembering. The building sat further back than other stores, its marquee half swallowed by vines. The windows were dark but not empty. Something about the way the building kept its silhouette meant it had been waiting. Raglan drove with a practiced charm, telling tales of dancing robots and pinball tokens. He didn't tell Mike everything. Some things in Grand Rapids were best left unsaid. The way you put a hand against the dented frame of a childhood toy and let the hurt stay inside. Mike said yes. The office was smaller than the brochure. 2 steel doors with tiny vents that didn't look like they were meant to stop anything. A bank of monitors that hummed like bees. And a VHS player as if the earth had been rewound to a time where tapes were still trusted to hold truth. The stage caught in the cone of Mike's flashlight like something caught in a throat. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica. Foxy's Cove was a dark cave just off stage, a pirate-torn curtain hiding the thing that moved like a shadow. There was a tape on the desk with Mike's name written in marker. Vanessa Shelley's voice filled the office with syrupy warmth when he put it in the player. A tour guide voice teaching safety rules and mascot names. The tape smiled and then hiccuped into static. When the lights flicked and the cameras cycled, Mike noticed it. A pair of eyes on the stage that twitched open for a second like a photograph coming to life. Anxiety is a treacherous lens. It refocuses the ordinary into the monstrous with the patience of a predator. The cameras showed Bonnie empty, then creeping through the dining room like a loosened puppet. A blue blur at 3 a.m. moved with the wrong angles, elbows bending as if in the shadow of an old human gate. Mike learned to shut doors and hold his breath. Bonnie found the office and banged on the door, a sound like plastic against wood and the thud of 100 small shoes. He kept the door closed. Chica arrived an hour later, a candlewick mouth and a cupcake named Carl that looked more like an accusation than dessert. When the clock spun past 6, the animatronics retreated to their stage places like children pulled from mischief by a bored parent. Mike's relief tasted metallic and thin. Steve Raglan texted an empty smile the next day, as if salary were the only conversation worth having. The town's memory was a room of cracked mirrors. If anyone had asked, Raglan might have said the place was sentimental or that the owner was stubborn. If anyone had looked, they would have seen how the building kept its doors closed even to demolition men. If anyone listened, maybe they could have heard the tape static at the heart of the place, like a glitch in the weather. Vanessa Shelley was blonde in the way museum mannequins are blonde, real enough and slightly off. She found Mike near dawn, breath caught and hollowed out by a night of doors and shadows. "I'm on the morning swing," she said, and later she told how she loved the place as a child, how the animatronics had taught her the cadence of joy. Vanessas are always a little uncanny. Small-town legends love to grow the edges of people into something else. She seemed a little too happy until the animatronics nearly took her finger. Foxy came with a sudden, jerking burst, pirate music and teeth, a malformed jolt from his cove. Freddy's face watched the CCTV cameras the way a general watches a map, precise and patient. Vanessa tried to act like a coworker, but the way she locked the office doors showed she already knew the rhythms, the taps and the soft, practiced scraping that meant an animatronic had decided they were hungry for attention. There was an odor in the back room when Mike opened it, oil and the sourness of something that had been left to rot. Vanessa said stay away from that room. Mike said the same in his head, leave the room to the town's unsaid memory. But curiosity is a dishonest friend, and the second night's conclusion tied itself with a ribbon of dread. The light on the half door in the back room found more than grease and broken props. Bodies were a library of old violence, those who had tried to pry open the place and vanished. Mike stopped cataloging details as much as he saw them. The room held a story, and he felt like an intruder in a text that hadn't been meant for him. Each corpse was a page folded over and forgotten. Vanessa had never known. The pizzeria kept its secrets like fossils, pressed and preserved in the dark. They were not alone when they left the back room. A night vision camera showed another intruder, an ugly, quick silhouette, racing across the kitchen tiles with Chica advancing like a mechanical tide. Chica's cupcake, Carl, glinted with a child's innocence turned nasty. The intruder fell, and the sound that came from the camera had no business being recorded by a security feed. Vanessa and Mike crawled and hid, and listened to the world rearrange itself into the sound of someone else being erased. Power dipped. The building was a laboratory for fear. When they crawled back to the office, their breaths were small the way you hold breath under cold water. Vanessa's story unspooled like a ribbon caught on something sharp. Raglan wasn't Raglan. Steve Raglan was an alias, a name worn like a costume to fit into a town's trust. When Vanessa whispered the old man's real name, William Afton, Mike felt the floor tilt in the room. Afton was the missing dark in local stories, the man who had been accused, always just shy of indictment. He had a daughter who still wore his last name as if it were a brand of shame. Mike tried Raglan's number and listened to voicemail take his anger like a toll. He felt a threat larger than phones and more intimate than property theft. Vanessa told him Afton meant to finish his work, to close a story with the same brutal punctuation as before. Lights went out that night in a way that was not municipal, but intimate. The sound of Freddy's warped music box threaded through the darkness like a lullaby played backward. Eyes opened in the dark and moved like distant flashlights. They learned the difference between panic and strategy. Doors sealed. Flashlights died. When the sun came up, they were still alive, but the building had sharpened itself to the geometry of a trap. Afton came like a revelation, slow, smiling, and wearing spring Bonnie like a second skin. The suit was a mess of age and industry, wires gone taut, foam eaten away at the seams. He could walk like a man, and like something stitched into machine rhythm. On camera, he looked like a ghost in company clothes. On the ground, he looked like someone who had never stopped performing his greatest hits of violence. There is a moment when guilt and reckoning collide. Mike watched Afton on the monitors and watched the angles of his own past slide into place. The purple car. Garrett. Afton's voice on tape, bland, sugared, always directing. It was Afton on a dozen small doorsteps of memory. "I took and killed him," he said on the feed, the confession dry as a desert and as sharp as a blade. He had the right kind of quiet. Vanessa moved like someone who had rehearsed the moment of final confrontation in 1,000 small nightmares. They used cameras like plans, corridors like chess squares. Freddy obeyed Afton like clockwork, no longer an animatronic but an instrument. Foxy's cove became a throat that could swallow. Bonnie was a harvest of angles. Chica was a persistent hunger with teeth. Afton wanted to make a show. He wanted to finish the last act of a play whose script he had written in blood. He meant to put Mike in the same place Garrett had been. Mike found himself running on muscle memory and panic, in those same rooms where every child had learned how to be small and orderly and watched. Vanessa fought the man in the costume with a terrible desperation. Whoever she was before this place had chosen her, she was now a person who would not let the theater of cruelty close without an audience. Spring locks are small mechanisms with a habit of betraying men in suits. They are exacting and archaic, an old compromise between man and machine. Under the wrong pressure, they fail with a sound like 1,000 needles and a single groan. Afton's body learned this precise cruelty. There was a moment the world compressed to the metallic twang of those locks releasing, a man trying to pull something that was not meant to be pulled. When the suit folded inward on itself in a final, sickening collapse, it was less a death than an unbaking. The animatronics turned on him, as if his dying had broken his hold of the place. The robots that had been used became the instruments that returned. The building itself began to protest. Tiles cracked, rigging seized, tiles loosened as if the place wanted to forget its last performance. Mike and Vanessa grabbed what they could. Afton's pockets yielded the payroll and a bonus check heavy enough to stop the rent clock for months. And they fled as wood and wire, and a man in costume remembered the old physics of rot and fell inward. Afton spat a promise as he bled into the backstage carpet. It was some truly haunting words. "I'll be back. I always come back." The town received a fire report the next day that didn't mention names. There were interviews, lots of questions, and sympathetic coffee cups exchanged at early hours. The press tasted the edges of the story, but left them for someone else to chew. Mike and Vanessa returned to the rental house and found Abby waiting in front of a TV playing cartoons. Mike held the paycheck like something taxable and wonderful. Abby laughed in that way kids do when they think the world is still safe and predictable. Her birthday that August felt like a fragile promise Mike intended to keep. Vanessa moved into the house with them. She made small improvements to the house, putting locks on the doors and leaving nightlights burning at the windows, and told bedtime stories that were stripped of animatronic laughter. Mike tried not to imagine what Afton had said. The promise had a way of ringing like a bell. He tried to make plans. He tried to forget the back room. He tried and failed and tried again. An old postcard of Freddy Fazbear sits on a kitchen shelf, the edges brown like leaves. It is summer light and the house smells like cake and something older, like unearthed metal. Abby's birthday candles glow in front of Mike, Abby, and Vanessa. Mike says he will take her to a park, maybe to the county fair. Vanessa says they are safe. Somewhere else in the town of Grand Rapids, however, in a block of rust and paint that had been left to decay longer than anyone remembered, another pizzeria breathed in slow shifts. On a display case, toy animatronics blinked into life, one small LED at a time. Somewhere in the distance, a music box turns, its tune faint and circular. A hint that the story is far from over.
Johnny was the kind of average American teenager who could recite the Pokédex entries of his favorite legendaries faster than he could do his algebra homework. On a rainy Saturday, he settled onto the couch with a bowl of cereal and the biggest grin when Name That Legendary flickered across the TV. The show was loud, silly, and a little nostalgic. It was exactly what Johnny needed. Between rounds, an ad rolled. It was for a shiny new Pokemon cereal coming out in a few weeks called Legendary Loopies. The box was an explosion of color, rimmed with tiny Pokeball-shaped loops and pictures of Reshiram, Zekrom, Lugia, and other towering legendary figures grinning like mascots. The voiceover promised flavors in every bite and a collectible spoon. Johnny didn't think twice. He pre-ordered the limited early access box almost instantly on his phone because, honestly, who could resist the orange creamsicle loop? Johnny had been waiting for weeks. The send-off email still glowed on his laptop screen, reading early access. Legendary Loopies will arrive first to our earliest fans. And he grinned every time he thought about the surprise collectible Pokemon-themed spoon that, according to rumors and leaks, apparently came with the box. That night, he watched Name That Legendary twice, then 3 times, practicing answers he never quite remembered out loud while leaning forward on his knees. When the cereal arrived in the afternoon, which was a bright box covered in glossy art of Reshiram, Zekrom, Lugia, and other cool legends, Johnny could barely keep his hands off it. He put the box on the counter, snapped a picture for his future cereal collection, and hid it in the cupboard like it was treasure. The next morning, sitting at the kitchen table in his pajamas, Johnny poured a bowl of Legendary Loopies and found them delightfully poppy, fruity, and surprisingly, with the orange creamsicle pieces tasting just like summer. He used the included spoon, which had a tiny Reshiram silhouette on the handle, and licked milk from the corners of his lips between bites. It felt like a special secret, like he'd unlocked an extra level in childhood. That night, he went to bed thinking about rare candies and naming all the legendaries he had seen on TV. A few days later, while the adult world hummed along oblivious, Johnny's world began to shift before his eyes. At first, the changes were small and awkward. Midway through a history study session one night, Johnny had suddenly scarfed down an entire family-sized pizza and still tinkered in the kitchen for snacks, only to feel normal again 5 minutes later. He shrugged the first time off as stress eating. Then, at odd hours at night, he found himself booting up his old Nintendo DS and spending hours in Pokemon Black and White, lingering at the screen whenever Reshiram appeared. It felt like a warm nostalgia tug, but deeper, it was as if his attention was being pulled toward one particular figure on the screen. Soon physical signs crept in too. At first, it was tiny flecks, a faint fuzz along Johnny's forearms that looked like someone had brush flour across his skin. Over the next hours, the white fuzz thickened, soft and solid like the beginnings of a snow-dusted coat. Then his voice, when he practiced trivia into his phone, sometimes came out with an odd, musical trill, which was more like a calling sound rather than a sentence. He laughed it off as stress or a sugar high. That night, he set his toothbrush on the sink, yawning, and fell asleep as a teenager should, until morning. The next day, morning light spilled across his bedroom. Johnny yawned and rolled over. He felt larger, heavier, and somehow fuller around the chest and shoulders before he opened his eyes. When he finally woke up, groggily stumbled to the bathroom and reached for his toothbrush. His fingers awkwardly fumbled the handle. Claws, not fingers, wrapped around the plastic handle of his toothbrush. The skin on his knuckles was furry and white. Panic rose fast and hot. Although he didn't want to, Johnny forced himself to look into the mirror, and his jaw just about hit the floor when he saw what looked back at him. Where a teenage boy should have stared back was a majestic, white-furred, blue-eyed form. Sleek, feathered wings folded behind shoulders that were broad, not menacing, but impossibly grand for a human frame. His face had the soft, streamlined beak and noble curve of a dragon, and his mouth opened not with words, but with a long, rolling cry that vibrated the glass. For a second, Johnny tried to speak. What? I'm Reshiram? A legendary? No way. This has to be a dream, right? I'm sure I'm still asleep. This must just be a bad dream. I know I'll wake up any moment now. This just can't be real. To himself, he sounded like his old voice in his head, but to the world, he came out in legendary calls and chromatic hums. Johnny pinched himself until he felt the sting. He wasn't dreaming. He was very awake and had inexplicably transformed into a Reshiram. For a moment, terror was a cold thing in his chest, and then curiosity prickled right next to it. Before Johnny could process anything, the front door burst open. Several kids from school filed in, laughing. One was clutching a phone with an excited glow. Yo, our Poke radar lit up, and the app is showing a Reshiram right here. One squealed. Dude, we can capture it. Another bellowed, already fishing a master ball from a pocket like it was the most casual thing on a Saturday morning. Johnny flapped his arms, awkward, powerful, and unfamiliar, and tried to speak. He attempted to shout, "Wait. Stop. It's me, Johnny." But the only reply was an alarmed, majestic howl. By the time he processed their intent, a master ball was already arcing his way. To Johnny's friends from school, he wasn't Johnny anymore. He was a once-in-a-generation capture opportunity. Johnny made a run for it, and panic shoved him into motion. He barreled past them, knocking into a table, skidding through the living room while avoiding the thrown master balls. In the chaos, Johnny's elbow smashed into his TV. The screen splintered into a spiderweb of black and white cracks. For a wild second, he watched his favorite show splinter into static and felt a bizarre weightlessness, like an actor who suddenly realizes the audience is watching him and wants to write the next line for him. He crawled away from the ruined television, breathing heavy breaths that sounded like distant thunder. Being a legendary and trying not to get captured is very different from any late-night Pokemon battle Johnny had ever imagined. People screamed, phones recorded, and almost everyone who glimpsed him shouted, "There's a Reshiram! Capture it!" Pokeballs flew like confetti, pelting his flanks, thunking harmlessly off feathers, and failing with dramatic whines. Each near capture sent kids and trainers into a chorus of groans. Johnny learned fast. Being a legendary was exhilarating in cinematic ways and terrifying in practical ones. Every phone camera ping made his heart drop. People shouted strategies. Kids wept with excitement. Adults shouted orders. Johnny discovered how chaotic it was to duck through a movie theater. The velvet ropes snapped under his wingspan, and popcorn rained down like an embarrassed cloud. At one point, a teenage girl in a cosplay Misty jacket tried to hand him a sandwich. "Please take this," she said. Johnny, now Johnny the Reshiram, attempted an appreciative chirp and took the sandwich in an awkward claw. But upon trying to eat it, he found the bread tasted like cardboard and spit it out. He missed pizza. He missed toast. And most of all, he missed the simple smell of breakfast and a normal life that was now seemingly gone. When police sirens wove into the chaos, Johnny bolted, his heart hammering, fur brushing stone. The police arrived across the street, with sirens yawning in the evening. He braced. The world felt smaller and more dangerous. He flattened his vast, feathered body against brick and hid in an alley, panting in a chorus of purrs and vocal trills, with breaths that felt like gusts, heart pounding in his new massive chest. Then a voice in the alley, soft, measured, and very far from panic, called, "Hey, over here. You'll be safe with us, I promise." The door that opened in the alley was a small, unexpectedly ordinary door. Inside, the lights clicked on and revealed two figures that made Johnny forget about fear for a beat. Lugia and Zekrom. Lugia was the first to move. She appeared like a living white gale, a smooth, silvery body shaped like a graceful sea creature with broad, wing-like fins that shimmered with faint blue underglow. Her eyes were calm and ocean-deep, and when she tilted her head, Johnny felt the faint scent of salt and storm. Zekrom contrasted like thunder. Broad-shouldered, matte black scales, electric coils along his spine that hummed with restrained energy. His eyes were sharp, charismatic, and bright as lightning. Where Johnny the Reshiram was graceful flame and white velvet, Zekrom was compact storm and taut muscle. For the first time since he'd transformed, Johnny felt understood. Their presence felt like standing between a storm and a calm ocean. Lugia's wings folded carefully as she spoke in a calm, human voice the way people do when they don't want to startle a child. "We've been monitoring the broadcast," she said. "You were the first. You're confused and scared. That's normal." Johnny responded, "What do you mean, the first? What on earth are you talking about? And why can I understand what you're saying?" He was stunned and strangely relieved. With them, his cries translated into clear words they could hear. "People hear our voices as cries," Lugia explained in a soft, human-like voice. "But to each other, we speak plainly. Your inside voice, speaks like a boy. Outside, you cry like a legend." Lugia explained something that had seemed impossible. Pokémon can understand each other like beings of the same language, while humans interpret their cries as strange noises. But within their own kind, speech is clear. To Johnny, that meant that under the feathers and scales, there was a bridge between the human he knew and the legend that he had become. Johnny gaped, then laughed, a sound like a halftime whistle that surprised him. Through them, he could explain the panic outside. They told him they'd been tracking a food company called Team Galactic Foods for weeks and had seen worrying signs. Zekrom's voice was a low rumble, skeptical and sharp. Johnny, we noticed the early order badges. Whoever made the cereal you purchased wanted to transform people. That's not natural. Luigi's soft eyes met Johnny the Reshiram. We believe the cereal you ate carried an experimental transformation reagent. It seems that someone wants to mass produce it. She outlined a plan. We need the rest of your cereal box. There might just be a clue inside. That night, they snuck back to Johnny's house. Johnny's friends from school camped on the lawn, master balls lined up like horrifying lanterns. Lugia, Zekrom, and Johnny moved fast. Lugia's fins folding inward, Zekrom's black bulk distracting a patrol, and Johnny sneaking into his house to retrieve the cereal box. In Johnny's kitchen cabinet, they found a half-eaten Legendary Loopies box, took it, and quickly returned back to the house in the alley, the trio's small and humble base of operations. Lugia rifled gently through the inner flaps and lifted a shiny square of print. A QR code, she murmured, scanning it with her Poképhone 25, a sleek device carried by legendaries, which were to life. The code revealed a private page on the screen for Team Galactic Foods. The site's backend, secured but not invincible, spilled data that made Lugia's feathers ruffle. In dry, corporate prose lay a plan. Mass distribute a serial prototype designed to induce transformations in children, coding the changed minds to respond to a central control node. Team Galactic Foods, thinly veiled under the friendly brand, intended to engineer a generation of young legendaries who would obey and enact a grab for control in an evil nationwide takeover scheme. Johnny felt used. The early access box was a mistake in the company's rollout, the site claimed. An A-B experiment. The one Johnny had consumed lacked the final mind control implant by accident, which was why his mind had remained his own even through the overwhelming change. Lugia's eyes hardened and her mouth tightened. They want to control and convert kids all over the country, which in legendary forms would give adults little resistance to them. She said, "You were transformed, but not controlled because your batch was a mistake. We cannot allow this to continue." Johnny's anger burned hotter than his new feathers, and he slammed his claws on the ground in rage. He had been a test case, turned into something majestic, and then hunted like an amusement. He wanted to shout, to call the company out in every forum and on every screen. Instead, he steadied, listening as Lugia and Zekrom started working on a plan to stop Team Galactic Foods before the cereal shipped nationwide. They told Johnny the plan would take a few days to fully figure out, so Lugia and Zekrom told Johnny to stay low profile during that time and return to the alley once they had come up with something. Johnny left, still angry, but a little calmer now that he knew the big truth, and tried to live a normal life like he had before the transformation, at least for a little while, although it was strange, awkward, difficult, and even a little funny being a legendary Reshiram after all. This is what he did during the next few days while he was waiting, with Zekrom handing Johnny his very own Poképhone 25 right before he left so they could keep in touch during that time and keep him up to date on the latest news. Human food refused Johnny the Reshiram. What had tasted like delicious pizza before now tasted like cardboard dough and stale plastic, and there was no way he was going to eat that. A fast food run became a diplomatic mission when the drive-thru attendant attempted to hand him a Happy Meal through the window, as Johnny still had an urge to eat fast food, despite his new form. He swooped the Happy Meal away like a snack-sized offering, but found the meal tasted like eating trash to him, which made him cry. The only things he could stomach were strange Pokemon gifts Lugia had cooked up for him, such as a glowing rare candy that felt like warmth in his belly, and a stew that smelled faintly of an ocean breeze and toasted marshmallow. He learned fast that being a legendary comes with very refined and inconvenient taste buds. Johnny also learned that Halloween costumes and cosplay groups could look terrifyingly similar to real threats. A local con swarmed the streets with people in elaborate Pokémon suits. He hid inside a storage crate and rode a parade float for 20 freaked-out minutes before sneaking away. Another time, Johnny curled in a row of recliners in a movie theater while trying to watch a new film called Five Nights at Freddy's 3 and got an entire small child's worth of candy flung at him by mistake. A security guard whispered sympathetically, "We thought you were an animatronic stunt." Johnny felt a weird kinship with the popcorn machine. When trying to return to his school one day, a swarm of kids outside the school grounds tried a coordinated ambush on Johnny, forming a chain to throw their Pokeballs with synchronized fervor. Johnny dodged gracefully, then mistakenly stepped on a kid's skateboard. The skateboard and the owner survived. Johnny explained by making a short, awkward series of friendly chirps. The owner hugged his knee like it was the most normal thing in the world. He then remembered his broken TV he had smashed at his house by accident when the transformation had first occurred, and he had to make a run for it. After finding and disposing of the smashed TV in the living room of his house that night, he had to go to the store and buy a new TV. Walking into the electronics store as a Reshiram drew attention, but not the capture frenzy. Maybe it was the late hour, or the employees' careful professionalism, or the fact that the store staff were trained to keep their calm when unusual customers arrived. People watched with curiosity, phones raised but not quite hostile. Johnny kept his head bowed and his feathered shoulders hunched. He picked a big smart TV, bigger than before, so the crack in the living room would be a memory. The cashier kept his cool and even offered a friendly chat about warranties. Johnny said nothing, answering only with small nods. A short while later, and back in the living room, setting the new screen in place, Johnny's reflection shimmered in its glossy black. He watched the first few minutes of a new episode of Name That Legendary on the new machine, and then switched it off and slept in his bed, now several sizes too small. The next day, Johnny's attempt at normalcy became comical when he tried to jump on his old Wii balance board after hooking it up to the new TV to keep active as Johnny the Reshiram. The software screamed, "Please enter user statistics," and then politely labeled him, that's obese, in a flashing warning when he stepped on because the game's sensors were not built to handle a legendary's mass and size. It said he weighed 2,025 pounds and 9 feet in size, and the game's comment made him feel larger than ever, but not in a good way. After an awkward and lonely session of modding the balance board with strings and duct tape, he finally got his profile to register, and then carefully played through Wii Fit Sports Resort in a crouch between wing beats while holding what was, to him, a small Wii remote while standing on the balance board. He laughed at himself afterward, thinking about how funny it was to make a game treat him like a human again, and also because it meant he still had a little ingenuity left. Then, on the roof of a grocery store, Lugia taught him how to ride wind currents gently. He learned the exciting feeling of stretching his wings and flying around, even if just for a short time, which was an amazing joy and wonder. Then, hiding on his roof at dawn, Johnny watched the sun curl over rooftops and realized he'd learned a new appreciation for quiet. Reshiram's majesty had taught him to respect small moments, like the steam of coffee on a kitchen counter, the way a friend's laugh tumbled open, and the honesty and kindness of a wing that tucks you warmer than your heaviest blanket. A few days later, Johnny got a text message on his Poképhone 25 that said Lugia and Zekrom had finished the plan and needed him back at the alley house so they could discuss it together, and Johnny quickly flew there and entered the small house in the alley where his allies were waiting. The plan felt fragile and immediate. Infiltrate the plant, find the production line, and destroy the machines. While Johnny, Lugia, and Zekrom mapped a nighttime route, footsteps sounded at the door. A figure slipped into the lamplit room in a coat oddly like a scientist's lab coat and oddly like a fan-made uniform, all at once. Calm, thin, and impossibly composed. He introduced himself as N. N's voice was soft, precise, and oddly sincere. "You meddle in affairs you do not understand," he said, smiling with a confidence that had no trace of humor. Team Galactic's goal is not merely profit. We believe transformation can create a new balance. Children, turned into legendaries, would reshape society. You may applaud the result, but the means are decisive. Lugia bristled. Zekrom's plates sparked darkly. Johnny the Reshiram, trembling his chest, felt small. But why use kids? What's wrong with you? He cried and then yelled, human words folding into raspy, angry calls, and walked close enough that Johnny could see the meticulous calm on his face. Because children are beginnings. They are malleable, just like you. They will lead the change we need before the older minds can resist. Why wait for consent when you can create compliance? When Johnny jumped forward, an instinctive, furious leap, In barely flinched. With a few whispered words, In triggered an alarm that echoed like a bell in a cave. Team Galactic security closed in, and the trio had to move now or lose the chance. They flew into the night under cover of fog and concrete. Zekrom peeled open a back conduit with a bolt of controlled lightning. Lugia blew a gale that sent alarms scrambling and dampened vibrations. Johnny felt the raw exhilaration of power, but also the sobering knowledge that he could not return to the life he loved until this was over. They stormed the production plant in a barrage of feathers, scales, and roars. Conveyors of finished cereal spun, boxes stamped with the Team Galactic Foods logo rolled like a torrent, and rows of canisters hissed with powders that smelled faintly citrusy and metallic. Machines purred with a purpose that made Johnny's teeth ache. The fight was close, and moved like a strategist in a war he had written the rules for, commanding robots and security units, as if directing an orchestra. Zekrom seized a control panel with a surge of electricity and ripped wiring free as if pulling a tooth. Lugia created a gust that made the cameras weep mist. Johnny breathed a controlled flare that singed conveyors and melted circuitry without starting an inferno that would endanger innocent workers still trapped in the complex. It was terrifying to have that level of force in his limbs and not know the measure of it. In the end, they smashed vats, scattered crates of cereal, and shut down the mind control core, a machine of blinking lights and looping code that had the quiet smell of antiseptic, and escaped in a sleek jet, flipping the plant's security camera off with a final, chilling line as he soared away. You have delayed us. You cannot defeat progress. There will be more opportunities. Johnny felt hollow for a moment. They had stopped the distribution, but he remained in Reshiram form. The destruction felt righteous yet incomplete. Johnny, Zekrom, and Lugia returned to Johnny's house under a sky rinsed clean by fight weather. Zekrom and Lugia were weary but steady. They explained gently to Johnny that the mind control element had been part of a central module inside the plant. Without it, the transformation reagent would no longer be produced. Unfortunately, there was nothing in the plant to reverse a transformation that had already occurred, which made Johnny feel horrible. Johnny sat on his porch steps and felt the weight of that sentence, while staring up at the constellations as if they might offer an answer, but they did not. Before leaving, Zekrom and Lugia did something unexpected. They stepped toward Johnny's old Nintendo DS, the cartridge of Pokemon Black and White still inside. With a strange look and flash of energy, they folded themselves, not into anything violent, but into a quiet form, and slipped back into the game. How did you do that? Johnny managed, whispering to a console he'd won as consolation prize in a tournament 3 years ago. Lugia's voice came faint, the way distant waves sound. We have our ways. You found us because we were watching you. They left with a promise of watching out for the future. If N comes back, Zekrom rumbled, we'll be near. That night, Johnny the Reshiram tried to sleep and found himself missing the simple things. Human hands, the weight of a backpack, and the embarrassment of school hallways. Exhausted, scared, and raw with feeling, Johnny laid down in his bed and let the enormity of the hours wash through him like rainwater through a gutter. He cried a waterfall of tears, not with the wildness of a legendary beast, but with the aching, human sorrow of a teenager who had watched his normal life get smudged like watercolor. He fell asleep exhausted, a teenager inside legend-sized fur, and dreamed of the cereal ad jingle, transformed into a taunt. He dreamed of N's voice. He dreamed of Lugia's eyes and Zekrom's crackling chuckle. When morning came, he hesitated to pry his lids open. After getting out of bed, Johnny shuffled to the mirror and braced himself for more white fur and deep blue eyes. Instead, he saw his own face. Human eyes. Human hair. The toothpaste cap in his hand looked right. The toothbrush fit in his fingers like it always had. The white fur was gone. The wings were gone. He laughed, a sudden, giddy, shaking sound. Relief rushed into him like a summer storm. He was Johnny the human again. When his friend from school knocked that afternoon and asked him to watch name that Legendary, they seemed sheepish, like kids who had been part of scare. Johnny declined, saying, "I need a break from Pokemon." He didn't tell them about being chased by Master Balls or fighting a man who wanted a weaponized breakfast. He was tired from everything that had happened and just wanted some much-needed time alone. Johnny's friends respected his decision, curiosity mixed with guilt in their faces. Before they left, one of them announced that Legendary Loopies had been pulled from shelves and recalled. Team Galactic Foods project had been halted by the scandal of the plant attack and leaked internal files. Johnny's stomach flipped. It was a weird comfort to know that no one else would be tested and that no more children would be transformed without consent. That night, Johnny sat on the porch with dinner warming beside him. The stars were pinpricks of quiet approval. He thought about the week's absurdities while he had been a Reshiram one more time, like a montage. Such as the day he tried a random piece of rare candy he had found, which had been too fizzy and made his teeth sparkle. The time a gaggle of teenagers misfired a Master Ball that had landed on his tail, making Johnny run away scared. How the Wii Balance Board had declared him obese, which he hacked while giggling through tears. And the embarrassed store clerk who scanned a barcode on a giant TV while trying not to stare, and the way Johnny had broken his old TV and then gotten a bigger one that somehow felt like an apology to his old self. He also remembered the fear of being hunted, of losing his identity, of a company that treated children like test subjects. That shadow stayed with him like a lesson, that excitement and consumer culture can hide risks, and that sometimes you need to look past flashy ads and check the small print. As the porch light haloed his plate, Johnny felt strangely grateful. He had been a legend, literally, and come back to being a boy. He had friends who loved him even if they had panicked, and 2 legendary allies who would always watch. He imagined a future where he might find a way to help more, where the lessons of Team Galactic Foods would be used to teach others to ask questions and stand up for what was right. He put the spoon down, smiled at the quiet sky, and said aloud into the cool air, mostly to himself, "Okay, maybe I won't watch name that Legendary tonight. I think I'll find some new show to enjoy." He laughed, the sound bright and human, and went inside. Somewhere, in the slow hum of the city, a note from N flickered. The old villain's promise, not a threat, but a promise of a story left unfinished. Johnny felt his pulse quicken, not with panic, but with a strange, adventurous readiness. He had the taste of orange creamsicle still on his tongue, the memory of wings and electricity warm in his bones, and a life that now included knowing the language of legends. He set his plate aside and turned off the porch light. In the window, his reflection smiled back as a boy who had been, for a terrifying and magnificent week, a legendary, and who, for now, was content to be Johnny.
Thunder rolled like a drumline as Bowser stood before an enormous easel. At least enormous to anyone who wasn't exactly the size he used to be. Dark clouds swirled outside the window of his mini-castle, lit from within by a single lamp and the glow of a particularly triumphant paint splatter. He stepped back, tiny chest puffed, and admired the final stroke. "This is a masterpiece," he rumbled, voice wobbling with joy. The painting showed a skeletal Mario posed like a tragic hero. Dramatic, stark, and unmistakably inspired by the old game-over silhouette that used to haunt many a galaxy. Black and bone-white, and a splash of crimson for drama. Bowser's claws had a flair for theatrics, and for a moment the castle felt like his again. A gigantic face filled the window. Luigi! His nose pressed comically to the glass, as if inspecting a fishbowl aquarium. "Whatcha painting, Bowser?" he asked, equal parts bemused and curious. Bowser nearly dropped a jar of starbit blue pigment. "Luigi." He paused, flustered, then straightened and tried to look dignified. "What do you think?" Luigi's grin was honest and wide. "It's spooky in a good way," his eyes softened. Standing next to Luigi, Mario's shadow stood rigid and watching. He hadn't come to be charmed. He remembered teeth and fire, and the way Bowser had driven him to the brink the last time they had clashed. "I don't trust him," Mario thought, jaw tight, voice silent as stone. A year earlier, after an especially explosive defeat, Mario and Princess Peach had chosen restraint mixed with compassion. Bowser had been shrunk with a mini mushroom and placed inside a painstaking replica of his castle that sat inside of Peach's castle, with Mario and Luigi keeping guard on Bowser to make sure he didn't try to escape from his tiny prison. Luigi had visited often. Mario came less, more sentinel than friend. Peach had hoped kindness could tame the terrible temper, and Mario had hoped that watchfulness could keep the Mushroom Kingdom safe. From the vantage of his tiny battlements, Bowser had transformed confinement into craft. He'd fitted thimbles as planters, twine as tapestries, and made a throne from the lid of an old cookie tin. He painted not only to pass the time but to be seen. Vigorous lava landscapes, a still life the pie of many sweets, and self-portraits staged with Princess Peach smiling politely by his side. He discovered the peculiar solace of routine, trimming a single bonsai-like volcano plant each morning, organizing brushes by claw size, and curating a greatest hits wall of canvases that reflected moods both grand and ridiculous. Painting had become a way of translating growls into strokes. Sometimes the pictures were fierce, sometimes unexpectedly tender. On that afternoon, he climbed to the top turret, paintbrush tucked behind an ear, and presented his latest work, an idealized portrait of himself flanked by Princess Peach. Luigi clapped, eyes glittering with encouragement. Luigi said, "Oh wow, you've really improved, Bowser. I really like all of the colors." Mario, however, narrowed his eyes, crossed his arms, and declared bluntly, "It's trash." The phrase hit like a thrown shell. Bowser's nostrils flared. One paw slammed the canvas and it snapped with a theatrical crack. For an instant, the old Bowser rose like steam. Angry and enormous in all the ways Mario feared. "How dare you criticize my work? I will tear all of your skin off and only leave your bones." "You," Bowser began, menace cracking through. Luigi stepped back, alarmed. Mario's face hardened into an expression that had kept him alive through worse. Then Bowser's expression shifted. The fierceness simmered into embarrassment. No, I didn't mean it," he said, voice smaller. "That was the old Bowser. I promise I'm different now. I'm going to go get my 8 hours of sleep now, or I'll really turn into a monster." He shuffled away to a tiny bed as if that could seal his claim to change. Luigi bought it wholeheartedly. Mario did not. He had seen promises like this before, and being reformed was a long road for a Koopa King whose claws were made for demanding and taking. That night the sky became a painter's dream. Comets carved bright swaths through the night sky, scattering star bits like confetti. Toads rushed about with baskets, laughing as they scooped up the glittering treats, which later ended up in pies, pastries, and festival punch. Princess Peach declared the Star Festival open, a centennial celebration when a comet brushed close and the Mushroom Kingdom looked up in awe. Beneath the festival's jubilation, a darker preparation unfurled. At hidden shipyards and under tarps, Bowser's minions readied hooks and chains, polished airships, and waited for a signal. Escape plans, once idle fantasies, turned into engineering blueprints. The objective was simple: free Bowser, return him to his former size with Kamek's magic, and reclaim Peach's castle in the name of the King of Koopas. Mario and Luigi took turns watching the tiny castle that sat within Peach's halls that night. Bowser, painted by lamplight, hummed to himself. The brothers' sense of duty pitched them against the soft evening music of the festival. A tapping noise at a window turned both brothers' heads. They peered out to find an unfamiliar figure wearing a mask and a smirk polished with mischief. Bowser Jr. introduced himself without ceremony. "I'm Bowser Jr., and I'm here to get my dad back." He flourished a paintbrush that shimmered not with art, but with an uncanny glow. In moments, that brush, touched by magic, grew into a mace. With precision and surprising force, he knocked Mario and Luigi off balance, and then Bowser's troops quickly bound them. Bowser Jr.'s grin widened. His mission was almost complete and had little resistance. He scooped the tiny castle, Bowser inside, and made his escape. Kamek's hat tilted, his wand hummed with glowing power. Magic uncoiled like a ribbon and wrapped Bowser in color and thunder. He expanded, claws elongating, shell unfurling, the old rumble returning. Bowser now stood full size on an airship deck once again. "Bowser is back. Let's take Peach's castle for our own," he announced with a laughing thrill that echoed into the stone below. Airships responded like obedient beetles. Hooks and clawed grapples lanced out, caught the turrets of Peach's castle, and began the impossible, lifting a castle clean from its roots. The people of the Mushroom Kingdom watched in frozen horror as their home rose, lifted by steel and Bowser's will, and drifted toward the glittering canopy of stars. Mario and Luigi escaped their bonds and raced through corridors as Peach's scream echoed from the uppermost tower. Mario shot upward as if launched by duty. He reached the highest battlement and saw Kamek floating with malicious delight. "Enjoy your flight," Kamek said, and with that Mario was blasted outward. An arc of red and blue, into the cold, glittering sea of space, screaming as the Mushroom Kingdom shrank below him. Darkness and then blackness swallowed him. When Mario regained consciousness, he was on a patch of grass so vivid it seemed painted. Tiny creatures with flopsy ears and energetic hops bounced around him. Star bunnies. Their voices were quick and playful. "If you want to know where you are, catch us," they chit-chattered, turning the rescue into a game. Mario laughed, despite the soreness in his ribs. Catching the three bunnies turned out to be a ridiculous, joyful exercise in patience and clumsy heroics. Each capture felt like relief. When he finally scooped up the third, the bunnies shimmered and transformed into Lumas. Small star-like creatures with personality and purpose. A single Luma led Mario to a gently floating observatory that hung like a silver lantern above the planet's curve. Rosalina descended like a moonlight whisper, tall, serene, and ancient in a way that made time itself feel like an old friend. She explained the comet's true nature. The Comet Observatory was not merely a festival object, but a vessel on a voyage, passing by her home planet every 100 years to visit it, and the grand stars that powered the observatory had been stolen by Bowser Jr. Worse still, Princess Peach and several grand stars had been carried toward the center of the universe by Bowser and his forces. Without those stars, Rosalina could not pilot the observatory home. "You must gather the grand stars," she said, voice steady and grave. "Only then can we reach the center of the universe and rescue what was taken." Mario's chin tilted. He accepted without hesitation. There was no hesitation left. Only a steady, purposeful nod as he prepared to chase the scattered lights across space. Mario's first launch from a launch star shot him into the honey hive galaxy, all golden pollen and buzzing peril. A queen bee fretted over her hive, besieged by Bugaboom, a monstrous insect of unwieldy appetite. Mario's few bee mushroom transformations made him light and nimble. He darted through honey tunnels, dodged swinging pollen pods, and eventually faced Bugaboom in a showdown that required timing, sweetness, and a well-placed shell throw. The victory yielded a power star and a handful of rescued toads. Captain Toad emerged, out of breath and indignant about how he had been carried along in the chaos of the Snatched Kingdom. Together they returned to the Comet Observatory, and inspired, the Toads began building a proper Toad spaceship, determined to help take back the Grand Stars with coordinated might and enthusiasm. Mario's next voyage led him to the Good Egg Galaxy, a cyclone of islands, ancient statues, and islands that spun like bowls. There he saw a familiar sight, a Yoshi egg. Mario heard Yoshi trapped inside of that egg, and freed him by defeating a nearby Kamek, whose magic had trapped Yoshi in the egg. The two teamed up, and flights bound by Yoshi's tongue and Mario's agility dismantled one of Bowser Jr.'s airships. Amid the wreckage, Mario found a scrap of paper. It was an arrogant note from Bowser Jr. boasting that Luigi had been captured and held aboard Megaleg's moon. The news tightened Mario's chest into a knot. The mission shifted from recovery to rescue. Megaleg was a mountainous machine with a mouth of gears and a temperament built for stomping. Bowser Jr. taunted from atop a platform while Mario clambered up pistons, stepped on moving arms, and launched bullet bills to knock rockets from the robot's joints. The showdown felt cinematic, Mario racing up Megaleg while Luigi, bound but stubborn, found ways to disrupt circuitry from inside. In a climactic explosion of sparks, Megaleg's engines sputtered in a way that hurled Mario and Luigi free. But instead of falling to doom, they were caught by the shimmering uplift of a grand star. They blinked and then found themselves safe among friends, the stars glow a warm embrace. Rosalina welcomed them back into the observatory, the recovered grand star settling into place at the beacon with a reassuring hum. While Mario and Luigi plotted the next step, Lubba showed up. He was an eccentric, music-loving captain who arrived in a starship shaped like Mario's face. He asked to join the cause, and his starship, Starship Mario, became a cheeky and effective vessel for the team. Yoshi and Luigi partnered on a volcanic mission to face King Caliant, an enormous octopus guarding a grand star, battling with lava-slick guile and teamwork. Meanwhile, in Toy Time Galaxy, where everything felt like a child's bedroom come to life, the Toads, Lumas, Star Bunnies, and a crew of penguins led by a boisterous coach confronted Mecha Bowser. The robotic giant was terrifying among bouncing blocks and whirling tops, but the ragtag team's creativity and cooperation freed the Gearmos and returned another grand star to the observatory. Mario's journey across the galaxies built bonds and revealed strengths in unexpected places. Each planet forced him to think differently, use the environment, trust new allies, and never underestimate small creatures with big hearts. Rolling Coaster Galaxy was a lesson in perseverance. Mario had to guide a star ball down an endless, twisting slide slammed with gaps, boosters, and the insistent requirement to collect 100 purple coins. He fell. He tried again. He missed a coin. He tumbled into a loop and ended up with 99, destined for comedic despair. But the final run, a heart-pounding descent that combined reflex, timing, and a rebound off a spring snagged every purple coin. The final flip into a floating finish line revealed a mysterious and glowing green star unlike the others, adding a new flavor of wonder to their collection. In the throwback galaxy, Mario bumped into history. A red Bob-omb recognized him, shouting greetings that felt like an old friend calling across a crowded battlefield. The Hoomp King sat waiting at the top of his fortress, and Mario faced him with a mixture of nostalgia and seasoned skill. The fight resonated with echoes of past games and present stakes. With every stomp and dodge bring a reminder that the past and the present were welded together by courage. At last, the Comet Observatory held 5 of 6 grand stars. The hope was tangible and nearly radiant. Then Megaleg reappeared, this time with Bowser Jr. aboard, and an ambush shredded the observatory's serenity. Rosalina fought valiantly but could not hold. She was taken, a captive behind steel and paint, hauled toward the center of the universe where Bowser now planned to build a reactor of cosmic scale. Lubba watched in horror as the ship that had been a home and beacon was battered. "We must go after her," he said, voice cracking. There was no time to power the observatory fully. Instead, the group took a daring step: seize Starship Mario and fly with the 5 grand stars they had to the center of the universe. The Lumas stayed to guard the weakened observatory. It was a risky plan that fit the team's character: bold, improvised, and bound by friendship. The center of the universe unfolded like a painting, where the rules of reality were only suggestions. Gravity bent in spirals, light layered like ribbons, phantom galaxies hovered close enough to touch. There, Peach's castle, now Bowser's stronghold of victory, sat in a luminous, impossible basin. Bowser had constructed a galaxy reactor, fed by stolen grand stars, and the castle pulsed with an energy that hummed through the hull of Mario's borrowed ship. They stormed the castle. The fight was epic and intimate, a blend of large-scale spectacle and personal stakes. Luigi jumps for Bowser Jr., Yoshi leaps to shield, Captain Toad squeaks instructions, and Mario barrels forward like the central chord in a frantic composition. Bowser loomed, triumphant and terrifying, painting banners of victory even as he fought. It was the face of a king refusing to yield. As the battle roared, Rosalina, using the last of her strength, formed a black hole. It was an act wrought with terror and nobility. It swallowed Bowser's armada in a whirl of starlight, but the black hole's hunger grew beyond control. The team fled as the tendrils of the void began to reweave cosmos and memory alike. In that falling, Rosalina leaned close to Mario and spoke of Lumas: how some become stars, some become whole worlds, and some become the music that holds the universe together. The last thing Mario saw before blackness was Rosalina's hand squeezing his, then the soft, ancient smile that had felt like home through the turbulence. When Mario opened his eyes again, it was a gentle, festival-filled dawn. The Star Festival. The kingdom breathed again. Laughter filled the air. Tables sagged with celebratory dishes made with star bits and warm pies. Mario checked himself. Limbs intact, cap crooked, but still his. The world was whole. Bowser, small and oddly domestic once more, sat within his tiny castle painting, oblivious to the enormity of what had almost occurred. Luigi hovered, tender and tired, while Mario took stock of the faces around him. Rosalina drifted by on the comet's passing, eyes gentle and luminous. She placed a hand on Mario's shoulder and nodded as if to say the truth he'd needed. The journey had not been a dream, it had indeed been real. Peach embraced Mario and Luigi, and the Toads cheered. Bowser Jr., looking somewhat awkward and surprised, offered a truce. For the duration of the festival at least, the Koopas agreed to stand down and celebrate as guests, a fragile patchwork trust allowing everyone to share the feast. Bowser's forces, chewing on sugared star bits and telling half-honest boasts, looked smaller without the grim music of war beneath them. The festival's warmth stitched up something frayed in all of them. Mario and Luigi exchanged quiet grins, the kind that belonged to brothers who had tumbled through danger and come out steadier. Yoshi snuffled at a pouch of extra Starbit muffins. Captain Toad argued with a penguin coach about strategy. Lubba tuned a small, triumphal melody on his star-shaped harp. As the evening glittered to a close, Mario noticed a red cap with eyes at the edge of the festival. It was curious and alive, with eyes peering out like an explorer in a new hat. It nudged a piece of tart, and then rolled away as if carrying a private joke. Luigi chimed, and Mario laughed, understanding what Rosalina had meant when they were in the black hole, and said, "Welcome, welcome, new galaxy," as if teasing an odyssey and inviting the next adventure into polite company. Rosalina's final words were soft and clear. "May the stars shine on your path." There was weight in them, an affirmation and a promise. The cosmos had shifted and reformed. Friendships had been tested into fortitude, and the grand stars had been reclaimed. Most of them at least by courage, wit, and cooperation. The Mushroom Kingdom had celebrated, repaired, and listened to stories that would be told for generations. Mario and Luigi had learned a renewed lesson. Trust is earned through actions, not promises. Bowser had reminded them of a complicated truth. He could be both ridiculous and terrifying. And for now, the world was safer because brave little things had been willing to run into great unknowns. The Comet Observatory drifted across the night, like an old friend abandoning and arriving at once. Rosalina returned to the stars with an observatory humming with power, the Lumas singing a quiet chorus. Mario's red cap twitched under the starlight, and when the brothers looked at one another, they felt that curious, pleasant tingle the world gives you when it's both familiar and full of surprises. Somewhere at the festival's fringe, Bowser Jr. scratched a paint-stained chin and watched the comet vanish. "Not over yet," he admitted softly, smiling not with malice but with the stubborn grunts of a child who wants to be part of the story. Mario and Luigi raised their slices of pie and cheered. The cosmos outside the castle was large, and in that largeness were countless doors. They had shut one for now. Others would open. The red cap blinked once more in the moonlight, and the wind carried a new possibility. An Odyssey-sized adventure, as patient as a star, waiting for the moment the Mario brothers decide to chase it. The town of Grand Rapids had learned to trade grief for ticket sales. In April 2005, about a year after Freddy Fazbear's pizza place collapsed in March 2004. After one desperate week of night shifts had exposed secrets no one wanted to speak. Tourists and locals folded the story into a festival. FazFest sold T-shirts, staged haunted tours of the rubble, and lit the town with carnival booths that smelled of fried dough and synthetic fear. Families came for the spectacle. Conspiracy podcasts came for the footage. Children came for animatronic mascots. Mike Schmidt, who'd escaped the collapsed pizzeria with a scar and questions in his pockets, kept trying to be ordinary. He and Vanessa Shelley lived in a bigger, steadier house now and took care of his sister Abby, who was now 12. Abby had never seen the animatronics alive the way Mike and Vanessa had. She only knew them from stories and from model endoskeletons she built in secret. She glued tiny servos and painted fake fur in the evenings, patient and fascinated. To Mike, that fascination felt like a promise he had never wanted to make. One day after the collapse, he had told Abby he would fix the real animatronics. Vanessa, who carried the weight of being Afton's daughter, told Mike not to give his sister hope. The scars didn't need to be reopened. They needed rest. But rest was a currency the town couldn't afford. The cameras loved the past. And the past, badly mended, has a way of waking. Jeremiah had been Mike's friend since grade school. He'd gone indie with a paranormal investigation startup and posted sleepy, grainy videos that steadily grew traction. He called Mike one drizzly afternoon while the festival booths at FazFest went up. "He's gone missing," Jeremiah said. He meant Steve Raglan, the recruiter who had quietly staffed local places until the sudden collapse. To everyone else, Raglan had vanished like bad sleep, but Mike felt a chill every time his name came up. Raglan had been more than a recruiter. Raglan had been a smile with teeth. Mike and Vanessa knew the truth. They knew the man's real identity, William Afton. But the rest of the town didn't. "Hey, Mike, remember that bite story I told you?" Jeremiah said. "Well, I want to look for the original Freddy building. The one from the 1980s. You remember it from the old pictures, right? I used to go there as a kid. I want to film it. Real footage, no filters." Mike refused. He'd gone through the black heart of an unspeakable nightmare once. He'd woken with terrors and promises whispered by a dying man who had said he would return. "No way, not me," he said. "I'm done with Freddy's." Jeremiah didn't push. He recruited a crew instead. Matthew, a steady cameraman. Mark, who carried sound gear and a noise detector. And Jeremy Fitzgerald, an ex-security guard who remembered the original pizzeria like a map in his head. They left in a rattling van before dawn. Jeremiah's pitch included a story he kept repeating, the bite of 87. This is what happened on that fateful day in 1987, when his friend Ryan lost everything. The birthday party had been a whirl of balloons and confetti. Ryan's mother had set him on the little stage inside Kids Cove, while other kids pressed faces to the safety glass, and Jeremiah looked on from a distance. The Mangle, a take-apart Foxy rebuild, had been a messy, tinkered thing kids loved to examine, its exposed wires and playful claws treated like a puzzle. Ryan had loved to tug and probe. He'd reached into its mouth to push a loose cog back into place. The Mangle's jaw, loosened from all of the times it had been stripped and reassembled by kids, snapped. An accidental clamp, some said. Others later whispered of a deliberate failure. Metal pinched bone, the sound was not cinematic but vividly real, a sick, wet crunch. Ryan cried out, fell backward, and blood from his arm pooled on the stage carpet. The party dissolved into chaos. Parents screamed, chairs scraped. Jeremiah, 10 years old and frozen, spoke later of a man in a yellow spring Bonnie suit standing in the pizzeria's parking lot beyond a window, watching with purple, unblinking eyes and a large knife held in a yellow hand. The sight seared into Jeremiah. An adult smiling from outside the world, eyes like cold machine lights. Ryan was taken to nearby hospital. Infection set in. Desperate surgeons worked, but the wound had gone too deep. He died a week later, and no amount of therapy could rearrange the echo of that scream. The pizzeria closed in disgrace later that year. No grand hearing, no proper justice. Because the town preferred a closed sign to an open indictment. That memory was the key to Jeremiah's obsession. He had to see the old pizzeria one more time. After discovering an old forgotten camera during the crew's exploration that had recorded the tragic Bite of '87 event all of those years ago, he uploaded the footage in addition to what his crew's newly recorded pizzeria exploration footage had captured. The video, which Jeremiah titled Mangle's Revenge, went viral like a rumor with teeth. The original building crouched behind chain link and a sagging sign that read Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Its windows were soggy with grime. Inside, it smelled like old adhesive, popcorn oil, and that unmistakable copper hint people equate with old blood. Jeremy led them down a hallway lit by the weak cone of headlamps. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, and Toy Chica stood on a low stage, bright paint dulled by dust but shockingly intact. Toy Foxy was gone. Jeremy explained in an uneven voice. Kids had loved to take Foxy apart to make contests of who could reassemble the shell. The pieces had been looped back together, twisted in new ways, and eventually some maintenance had built that heap into what would later be called the Mangle. A terrifying animatronic with a bad sense of boundaries. The crew filmed the withered animatronics. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. Stuffed in a darker wing like ghosts in storage. Jeremy's voice took on a quiet hush as he said they'd been moved here after the franchise location's collapse. A reluctant archive of what the company once discarded. They rode a boat ride, a half-functional novelty that sloshed along an indoor canal, passing murals and peeling stickers. On the wall beside Kids Cove, a poster showed a grinning Mangle and the other toy animatronics from the old brochures. Let's eat, party, rock, play, have take-apart fun, rendered now like a lie. Then everything during their exploration fell apart. Mark wandered down a side hall to get cleaner audio and stumbled upon a small room with a music box. He wound the key. The puppet's terrifying face slid open like a grin. For a beat, the world seemed to inhale. Then the puppet moved with the sick patience of a marionette and strangled the breath out of Mark. His scream shredded the air. Matthew swung his camera, tried to back away, and the withered models came alive with a thought that might have once been instruction, and now was simply hunger. Mechanical hands reached. Matthew's recorder caught metal claws, and a thud too heavy to be staged. Withered Foxy's hook sliced through a hall and met Matthew. He was dragged away, his screams stuttering and then cut dead. Jeremiah and Jeremy ran for their life. Foot on gravel truck doors, the van's engine keening like an animal woke too soon. Only Jeremiah and Jeremy escaped with footage. The rest were eaten by the building. The morning after Jeremiah posted the footage, Abby left a note on the kitchen table. She'd watched Mangle's Revenge and wanted to see the animatronics for herself. She left in a hurry, bicycle wheels ringing down the street in a Faz talker, a plastic toy speaker sold at Faz Fest that played canned Freddy phrases, tucked into her bike's basket like a gift. Mike found the note and the empty kitchen and felt a collapse of air in his chest. He and Vanessa drove out in their car, following tire marks and tiny shoe prints. They were hours late. Abby arrived at the original building as the sun dropped. She went inside, trusting the Faz talker's guidance and childlike invitations. She didn't know what Jeremy's footage had been missing. Perhaps it was the way certain eyes followed, maybe the way the Mangle's spare parts looked like a hand reaching for a lost child. When she wandered into the office, the Mangle grabbed her, its animatronic limbs closing with clinical force, and forced her fingers onto a dusty keypad. She typed without understanding, the code the Mangle had learned the town might never have meant to use. 1987. The safes in that office were wired to safety latches, but the old systems responded. Doors clicked. The world shifted, and for the first time since they'd been placed in that building, the toy and withered animatronics were free to leave. Abby ran home crying but alive. She had no idea what she'd just done. Mike didn't want the pizzeria again. But when the animatronics started to walk empty streets in Grand Rapids, he had no choice. He agreed to help lock down the original building. The plan was simple. Get inside, check the cams, and use known tricks to hold them off. However, it turned out that it wasn't so simple. Night 1, the head trick. Mike sat in a cramped office with a bank of monitors. The toy animatronics, calibrated like the old promo footage, moved with sticky, childlike motions. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, and Toy Chica walked through the hallways as viewed on the cameras, and then toward the office. When they reached the office threshold, Toy Freddy's camera eyes locked on a human form, Mike. The old trick worked. Mike shoved a battered Freddy Fazbear head over his own and became, to the machine's sensors, one of them. He sat like a statue until they retreated. Night 2, the hallway and Balloon Boy. Balloon Boy's laughter echoed like a child's broken music box. Mike caught a glimpse down the office's central hallway. Withered Foxy's one mechanical eye shone like a fossil ember. With the flashlight he used like a metronome, Mike forced the animatronic fox to retreat into the shadows until dawn. Each soft metallic scrape on the vents sounded like a countdown. Night 3, parts and service. Mike and Vanessa explored the deep, rotten heart of the place. The parts and service room. The air was thick with grease and the stale sweetness of old pizza. In the dark, there lay a corner where something moved slower than the rest. Vanessa found it first. A faded child's shoe. The real horror came when the lamps clicked on and the room showed itself whole. A line of small bodies tucked between crates, bones veiled in older, brittle plastic. Henry Emily later described them as the 5 missing children. The room had held the victims of William Afton's earliest crimes in a dark mess of parts and wires. From a brighter corner, withered Freddy and the other withered animatronics stirred. Red eyes painted the room in bloodless light. With a single brutal swing, withered Freddy's neck joint snapped toward Mike. Withered Freddy's metal teeth grated into Mike's forearm. Freddy tasted blood. Mike ran like a hunted man, routing through vents, down service corridors, slipping through stacks of crates with animatronic fingers scraping his back. Vanessa caught him at a medical station and stitched him until his arm stopped bleeding. They returned at 5 a.m., and with the Freddy head trick, a mask he'd thought was useless on the older models, Mike watched withered Chica pass by the office, passionless and almost tender in her mechanical routine. The mask worked again, as if the machines recognized not the model but the program. Night 4, they leave the building. That night they learned the rules had changed. There was a new set of rules. The animatronics no longer belonged to halls. They could leave. Vent shafts emitted the sound of copper and the patter of small gears. Toy Freddy sidled into the Faz Fest fairgrounds and, like a predator with a child's voice, attacked festival goers. His jaws clamped on a vendor's throat as if to test the taste of warm, living flesh. At the same time, the Mangle leapt onto a car, and the driver's hands twisted the wheel as shards of glass rained down. The car crashed into a string of booths and caught fire. Toy Bonnie crawled into a suburban living room and stabbed a homeowner through the throat with a screwdriver that had been meant for stage repairs. Toy Chica, once an apron-clad joke, found Abby's school and tore through classroom windows. Teachers were pulled out screaming into the grass. The Marionette and Balloon Boy, on cables and motors, but with their own malice, snatched children from porches and left empty swings jerking in the dark. The town's ambulances and police were swamped. Jeremiah walked the streets in a soggy raincoat, terror on his tongue as he pointed at bloody bodies while shaking and trembling. "If we don't stop them tomorrow night," he told Mike with a voice like a snapped string, "half of this town will be dead by sunrise." The fifth night and Henry's confession. Desperate and exhausted, Mike, Jeremiah, and Vanessa found the one man who might have an answer. Henry Emily. Henry had retreated from the world, but he kept tinkering. He had always been ashamed of what he'd helped make. In his basement workshop, there were blueprints rolled like fragile scrolls, newspaper clippings taped together about Afton's early ambitions, and a single lamp that made little islands of light in a sea of dust. Henry's revelation hit like a dropped hammer. He told them the truth in pieces. He and William Afton had once been partners, dreamers who wanted to build a place where laughter and technology met. They'd made the animatronics like Freddy Fazbear to charm children, and, as a cover, a system to channel a darker obsession. Henry told Mike about Charlotte, his daughter, who had died during a birthday party at the pizzeria in 1980. In a flashback, Henry showed Mike a flailing and screaming little girl smothered by a misstep. Charlotte had fallen, hit her head on a stage corner, and died before the songs ended. Henry had kept the grief private, thinking it an accident. Years later, in 1985, 5 children vanished at the original pizzeria, the missing children incident, and Henry put the pieces together. Those disappearances were no accident. Henry realized the pattern and finally saw Afton for what he was, a man who weaponized joy to conceal cruelty. Henry's daughter had been the first he murdered. Mike's abducted brother, Garrett Schmidt, had been his second a few years later in 1984, and soon after others followed. Henry believed Afton had used the animatronics as a method of concealment, a way to get kids near his abductions and hide the bodies where no one looked. Behind curtains, in parts rooms, and under masks. The Springlock suits had been a last-gasp attempt at physical disguise, a horrific technology that could kill the human inside if it failed. Henry agreed to help. He fashioned an EMP-style pulse rig and a frequency modulator that would coax the animatronics into a safe mode, and then shut down critical servomotors. It was a fragile plan built on math, trust, and nerve. They returned to the original pizzeria, the 5 of them, Mike, Vanessa, Abby, Henry, and Jeremy, walking into a place slick with the sheen of the night's rain. Afton, now Springtrap, was there. He moved like a man stitched into a costume of rotten fur. When he spoke, it sounded like old hinges. "Did you really think I was gone? Where are you gonna run to? Now I'm going to kill you." He lunged at Mike, the suit's springlocks coughing like dying machines. The fight was close. Springtrap's claws found Mike's side. Pain flared white-hot, but he kept moving. Vanessa struck Springtrap with a heavy pipe. The suit staggered. Henry slammed his device into a control bank. The animatronics convulsed. Wires sparked and died. Servos stilled like puppets cut from strings. The remaining robots sagged back into their fixed poses. The crew sealed doors. They watched the machines like sleeping animals, and for the first time in days, the town took a long, trembling breath. Springtrap escaped through a grate and into the night. The damage he did was grave, but Henry made sure the pizzeria would no longer open its doors. They sealed the place. They returned the toys and wizards to a place they could no longer touch without risking more death. Grand Rapids stitched itself back together. Patrols and night watches were set, and parents kept children close. Henry retreated to his workshop to repair what he could, guilt and gear, and Mike, Vanessa, and Abby tried to go home and be a family within the new quiet. At first, they believed the worst was over. Abby went back to building tiny models, this time with tighter safety wiring. She sold them in a small online store that paid for bandages and therapy. Mike took day shifts, stayed off long nights, and drank coffee like someone learning to sleep again. But a weathered sign is seen on the outskirts of the town of Grand Rapids outside an old storefront, Fredbear's Family Diner. Old lights winked in its windows. Inside, a single bulb cast a glow over an isolated corner where something moved in the dark and made soft, metallic sounds. The hint was quiet, a dim light, a hum of an old motor, and it told a story worse than anything else. The work had not ended. Springtrap had not vanished. He lay down in other shadows, watched other rooms, and planned. Mangle's revenge had been costly. Townspeople counted coffins, stitched wounds, and burned what they could. The last sound is not music, but the soft tick of a clock, and underneath it, the mechanical scratch of claws against plaster. Yet on the edge of town, in the crumbling bones of a place that had predated the rest, a shape withdrew into a diner's backroom and began to unpick itself, to ready for the next act.